You're watching UATV News. My name is Inna Kosinska. Good evening. Strategic security in Europe and the military buildup on Ukraine's borders are the topics in Brest. French city hosts an informal meeting of European defense ministers headed by the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell.
It's been said a lot that Europe was kept aside, that Europe was not participating, was not around the table. Listen, we have developed an extremely advanced coordination with the United States. Myself, with the Secretary of State several times over the phone, my colleagues ministers, the Secretary General met with the Deputy Secretary of State. We have contacts with the United States as we never had in the past. There is no problem. We are in close cooperation and we are assured that nothing will be decided, nor even negotiated with the Russians without a close coordination with Europe and without the participation of the Europeans.
We need to speak with one voice with regard to Russia. This had been the topic of our discussions yesterday evening and will be the topic today, to have one common position and speak with one voice. The risk of an open armed conflict in Europe is the highest in the last 30 years, the incumbent OSCE chair and Polish Foreign Minister Zbigniew Rau stated. Today, the OSCE-Russia meeting is held in Vienna. Moscow demanded security guarantees as a topic of meeting. Kremlin once again tries to establish its rules over the issue of Ukraine's membership in NATO and NATO's expansion to the east. This week, consultations have already been held in Geneva and in Brussels as well.
In this vein, we should focus on a peaceful resolution of the conflict in and around Ukraine, in compliance with the Minsk agreements and in full respect of the sovereignty, territorial integrity and unity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders.
No guarantees on the Ukraine's NATO membership for Kremlin. Russia has no right of veto in this issue. This was a clear statement expressed by allies during the meeting of a NATO-Russia Council in Brussels. The Secretary General of the organization, Jens Stoltenberg, stated. They were clear-eyed. A new armed conflict in Europe is possible. That's why the talks track is important to continue to prevent it. And if Russia chooses the military path, then, citing the Secretary, the huge consequences will follow, both economic and political. More details in our special report from Brussels.
No sensations, there is the final outcome of the NATO-Russia Council meeting in Brussels. This is according to the NATO Secretary-General, who once again reiterated further Russian invasion in Ukraine will come at a huge price.
Russia has military forces in Georgia, in Ukraine, in Crimea, and also in Moldova. And these forces are there without the consent of the governments of these countries. They are uninvited and not welcomed. And if Russia once again uses force against Ukraine and further invades Ukraine, then we have to seriously look into the need to further increase our presence in the eastern part of the alliance.
He also stressed the responsibility for undermining sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine lays on Russia.
NATO allies are clear-eyed about the prospects for progress in these talks. They expressed serious concern about the Russian military build-up in and around Ukraine and called on Russia to immediately de-escalate the situation and to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of its neighbors.
The NATO's position unwavering. This is only NATO allies' decision when and whose membership will be accepted. At the same time, allies assumed the need of a dialogue. The US Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, stated that at no point the United States would take any accords behind their partners' back.
We will not make decisions about Ukraine without Ukraine, about Europe without Europe.
The discussion on a security topic preceded the informal meeting of the diplomats and the EU defense ministers in French Brest and within the OSCE meeting in Vienna. Reported by Vitaly Sizov, specially from Brussels for UATV.
It is Russia that has to make choice between de-escalation and diplomacy or consequences and confrontations, spokesperson of the US Department of State, Ned Price, stated at a briefing on the conclusion of the NATO-Russia talks in Brussels. Moscow is the side who can immediately ease tensions by the military drawdown. Diplomatic way is preferred by the US, while Russia yet shows no signs of willingness to de-escalation, spokesperson stressed. Citing Ned Price, US and European partners are united in response. May Russia make a strategic mistake.
Together, the United States and our NATO allies made clear that we will not allow anyone, as you have heard, to slam shut NATO's so-called open door, a policy which has always been central to the NATO alliance, ever since its founding. If there is a status quo, we will continue to engage in diplomacy and dialogue, but we've been very clear that that diplomacy and dialogue can only produce results if it takes place in the context of de-escalation.
Russia's actions do not reach the goals, while its strategic position is increasingly weak. The opinion was stated by John Herbst, director of the Eurasia Center of the Atlantic Council, on air of the Ukrainian Fact program on our TV channel. According to him, Putin's attempts to blackmail Ukraine, the US and Europe exposed him to the risk of weighty consequences.
Нужно понимать, что сегодняшние угрозы
We have to understand that current threatening rhetoric is a direct result of the breakdown of Putin's policy towards Ukraine, so that the so-called hybrid war in Donbass hasn't met its objectives. That's why he tries to design another way. But in my mind, he fails. He may ever succeed only if the United States responds to the invasion, or its risk will be really weak, while Biden has already signaled to Putin that new greater sanctions, military aid to Ukraine, increase of military presence in Poland, Romania and Baltic states to follow.
Destroy Ukraine as the state. This is the Putin's main plan, said National Security and Defense Council Secretary OSCE Danilov in an interview with Ukrainska Pravda publication. According to him, Putin has a plan for the reconstruction of the Soviet Union, and without Ukraine, he will not be able to do this. One of the ways to achieve the goal is to shake our country from within, Danilov said.
What is Putin's plan today? Internal destabilization of our country. If only internal destabilization occurs, he will be able to take advantage of this destabilization in order to do his dirty deed, period. If there is no internal destabilization, it will be much more difficult to fulfill the tasks that they have set for themselves. OSCE Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
Russia still considers neighboring countries to be its sphere of influence. This was stated by the member of the European Parliament, Viola von Kremlin, during an online discussion at the Kyiv Security Forum. According to her, Vladimir Putin, seeking to restore the Russian Empire, overestimates his capabilities.
Russia created this crisis, generated this crisis, and then started to blackmail us in the West, started to blackmail Ukraine, the NATO alliance, and everyone else. A lot of time spent on foreign policy, spent now on let's say, legal opportunities, sanctions opportunities, and also how to align with the NATO partners and especially also the partners in the European Union. I'm actually very, how can I say, optimistic? Maybe it's not the right terminology, but convinced that our partners in the coalition fully understand what's going on.
The Security Service of Ukraine exposed the Ukrainians who created a service for hackers and robbed 50 foreign companies for $1 million. It was used to download computer viruses, spyware, and other malware. The services were popular among members of international hacker groups that were engaged in collecting confidential information, spreading viruses, and blackmailing users. The special operation was carried out by law enforcement agencies of Ukraine, together with colleagues from the United States and Great Britain. A new program of cooperation with the International Monetary Fund has been prepared by the Ukrainian government. It starts after the expiration of the current standby program. As Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, said, active cooperation with international partners remains a priority this year. New joint projects and programs are needed to achieve sustainable economic growth. To remind, Ukraine received the second tranche of $699 million under the standby program at the end of November last year.
We are also talking about the continuation of the EU macro-financial assistance program, as well as the launch of a new joint program with the International Monetary Fund to support the implementation of reforms after the end of the standby program, which is relevant so far. This and next year we plan to sign 5 visa waivers, which we are working upon together with the EU. Those are industrial, energy, customs, digital and transport waivers.
There are already 3 regions of Ukraine in the orange quarantine zone: Ivano-Frankivsk, Kherson and Sumy. Over the past day, more than 10,000 new cases of coronavirus have been detected in the country. Among the sick are 590 children and 255 health workers. The leaders of the number of infections are Kyiv, Ivano-Frankivsk and Lviv regions. A team of doctors in Lviv saved life of 9-year-old Tanya. A minor cold provoked inflammation of the nasal mucosa and subsequently the girl's brain. Neurosurgeons had to perform several complex operations to stop the inflammation. How the surgeries went and how the little patient feels now, my colleagues will tell. I am no longer afraid to do a blood test because I have done it so many times.
Little Anya was in the hospital for a month. The girl says that during this time she got used to both daily procedures and doctors. All started with an ordinary running nose. Her parents thought it was just a cold.
We blew out, washed out, cleaned all of that. At first we just did it at home ourselves for a week. Then we went to a private doctor. Kid complained of a headache, but I thought it was because of a cold, from the fact that she blew her nose a lot and I had the same. But after a month of treatment she started having a fever.
Anya got to the Children's City Hospital already in a serious condition. The MRI examination showed that a pus was already in the brain. Diagnosis of subdural empyema over the left hemisphere. The ENT specialists quickly cleared the sinuses, but the positive effect didn't last long. The girl started to have convulsions and got into intensive care. And here neurosurgeons got down to work.
We used a more complicated method. We did a huge decompression trepanation of the skull. We removed the flap of the bone itself, measuring 12 to 10 centimeters, completely opened the dura, and carried out a complete sanitation of the pus itself, which laid flat above the left hemisphere of the brain.
The inflammation led to swelling of the brain, and it was necessary to wait for it to be gone. By this time, in order to preserve the skull bone in sterile conditions, the surgeons placed it in the anterior abdominal wall inside girl's body, having previously formed a kind of a pocket there.
The edema was very large, it threatened the child's life. This part of the skull could not be put back. We had a question about what to do next, because if you buy synthetic plates and then close the skull defect, it is expensive and it's not always good for children. We decided to keep this part of the bone in the anterior abdominal wall.
Anya stayed with the bone in her belly for about 10 days in hospital.
When they put a bone in my tummy, I couldn't walk. My tummy started to turn blue. It was very blue. Well, if the bone moved somewhere, it touched my skin with a sharp tip, and it started to turn blue.
This effect didn't threaten the child's life, doctors say. As soon as the cerebral edema was gone, the doctors proceeded to the next stage of the operation.
We managed to reimplant the bone in place. We managed to make a plastic of the dura mater. We will need a CT scan in a month to see the condition of the brain and the bones we've reimplanted in place.
Anya is at home now. The girl says she really missed her friends and her pets.
Thank you for healing me.
Reported by Nick Starkov and Julia Bill, UATV News.
Lysychansk, Uzhhorod and Dnipro-Truskavets. Most often Ukrainians traveled in these directions during the New Year holidays. According to Ukrainian railway company Ukrzaliznytsia, the western direction has become the most popular. 44% of passengers wanted to see the Carpathian Mountains. It is also reported that trains Ivano-Frankivsk-Konstantinivka, Uzhhorod-Lysychansk and Kyiv-Zaporizhzhia rarely have empty seats. They are in the top in occupancy among all destinations. That's all for this hour. More updates on our official website, YouTube, Twitter and Facebook pages. Thank you for staying with the UATV channel. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.